working. Let's shut down the whole system. Oh.
I think it started when you
No, we didn't have.
it's not earlier.
Did you disconnect the cable?
I did. Right now, the only thing that's plugged in is electric. Only electricity is plugged in, and that won't matter because that's a separate input. Basically, we have to start all over again. But like last time, this
Maybe a long press.
that's still on.
Yeah, turn
The-
on.
Maybe
The
a long
power
press.
input is off, but we'll just push the computer. Right? See the screen?
Maybe a long press instead of press it.
It's
Good
already
luck.
on. It's working, I think.
Yeah, it's working, but don't touch it. But I don't have a monitor. But I'll work from here if it works. It rained. You know, rain and technology, anything could happen. Anything could happen. Wow. If it's working, we don't touch it. We just go with it. Come on. Yeah, whatever works for you over there. Respect it, right? Probably. Okay, so on the video, you really can't see that screen at all. The screen didn't come down. Do we dare?
It will come down after the system is started.
Do we dare? What happens when we push screen down? Any bets? Well, we don't have any illumination at all. I have no idea. I have had problems where the system won't power up. I've never had this kind of a, it's like the pedestal is confused. We're gonna go back to 0 again,
Wow.
because that's on. That's actually working now. The little display, the little LED display was on for 1 second and went off. And now it says, please wait, Youngul June. That's good. We're connecting. Screen.
Wow. I don't
The computer is on. The computer, the pedestal monitor is not displaying yet. But now it is. Hey, it's only 15 minutes. It might work. Don't promise too much. Don't promise too much. How does this go? Try to make her not drunk by reading this. This should come. That's weird. All right, this will be better. Close enough. Good luck, girl. You guys aren't old enough to remember the opening of Windows 95 and Office. Office actually predates Windows 95. Office was out in the DOS era, but Windows 95, and then he was promoting Windows 95, and Office 95 came out at the same time. The paperless office, they didn't call it virtual, they called it paperless office at that point. And how it would be so economical in terms of saving money and efficient. People could work faster and better, and he lied, but that's okay. All right, so we're gonna try. If you didn't see the video before this, we've had 15 minutes of technical difficulties. The comment I made earlier is that I have switched around the CTL stuff a little bit because there was some duplication because I was in a rush yesterday. So right now we can see for today, April 2nd. You know, it's all appropriate because yesterday was April Fool's Day, right? It's just appropriate. And next Saturday, it says bits and pieces. And I've moved some things from here to here and here to here. And I've also added a bit, so that's why today is kind of a mess. And then I added something in the announcements, information, whatever you want to call it. There's a book that's free. It's legally free. It's rather dated. It was designed for probably undergraduate public administration program. But it's something that is certainly not bad. It's not the way I would handle it, but then I'm not a retired Catholic priest, so I don't quite teach it that way. But if you were to be teaching in the future with students who had no money, or if you've got idle time and you want to read something, it's interesting. And it was originally online as a PDF. I mean, I didn't have to convert it, so it's good quality read, and you can print from it, you can do whatever, because it is absolutely designed to be free. Okay, so today, perspectives in teaching professional ethics and the public interest. So the focus in today's session is really what do we teach, why do we teach, and maybe then, once we know what and why, maybe how we teach it. I'm not a firm advocate of any of the systems I have seen. I do it differently. Part of that is because of the translation of the Korean title of this class, because Cholhak kind of means philosophy, kind of means ethics. It's that whole issue we talked about before. And when I took over the class, I treated it as an ethics class, but with some philosophy, because I think it's the two concepts are tied, and you can't really talk about ethics if you don't have a theory in mind, a philosophy in mind of what are public administration, and yes, what are public administration. So the reading is Ongara's book, chapter 1, which is basically an introduction. The second half of the chapter talks mostly about how he proceeds through his book. The book is not free. The chapter was free, you know, kind of an enticement, get people to buy it. I would probably buy that book if I was teaching in America. And one reason I would buy that book is because Dr. Ongara is not American. And as I say often in my undergraduate classes, the United States is probably the least globalized country in the world. Maybe there's a couple places in Africa, I don't know, but Americans basically don't care to be globalized. And it's true in a lot of our academia also. I think scientists, that's more global, but things like public administration, political science, we don't read a lot from Europe. In the earliest days, yes, but since 1920, 1930. Americans really don't read Europeans very much. They don't read European journals very much. So getting that outside perspective can be valuable. If you go back and read Woodrow Wilson or something like that from turn of the century to the 1900s, they talked about the Germans. They talked about Marx and Weber, and now we don't. So here's my starting point. What we teach and how we teach professional ethics is often tied to what the instructor believes is important. And that's true for any class, but often when you're doing a first level class, introductory class, freshman class, or whatever, every instructor is kind of pushed in the department to do very broadly, because students will then take different tracks and they'll have different other professors. So they're kind of pushed to do something pretty broad brush. But once you get into a track, then that professor's own philosophy can really control. When I was an undergraduate student, I took a class on international relations, and it's in my major, it's actually my interest field, and I got a D because I wrote the wrong thing. Because I knew what the professor wanted, how he taught, how he thought, but I wrote one of the other approaches because I thought the professor was full of nonsense. I got a D, went to the department head with the paper, appealed. He looked at the paper and said, yeah, in my section of this course, you would have gotten a B+. You didn't get an A, you know that. I'm like, yeah. You would have gotten a B, maybe a B+. But you got a D. You know why? Your ego. You knew what the professor wanted, you didn't give it to him. So, yeah. Arguably, there are three types of ethics related to one's professional life: personal ethics, professional ethics, and organizational ethics. Now, when I talked about ethics before, I didn't talk about organizational ethics. But this class and next week, we are going to talk about organizational ethics. We could also talk about societal ethics as opposed to social values. Remember, I did the moral values thing. We could talk about societal ethics, maybe. What society says, well, all politicians are corrupt, for example. So if they don't steal too much, well, what you gonna do? And so it becomes okay. So maybe societal ethics would be another thing we could plug in here. Maybe society is organization, or maybe organization is dependent on society, or maybe the organization is arguably different from society. So maybe you plug a fourth in, or maybe you would just situate it. Anyway, my argument is all of these are tied to an individual's professional choices. Okay? An individual professional, this guy versus this guy. He's situated in this environment, but he still has to make choices because professional decisions ultimately are personal. You have to decide to follow the rule or not. To start class on time and finish on time or not. Is that a question of professional ethics? For some people it is, for some people it isn't. Are you earning your paycheck is one way to look at it. Are you educating your students as fully as you could is one way to look at it. Another one could be, we did a good job on rewarding the students by letting them out early. I did well, my students did well, it was a good class, no harm in getting out 15 minutes early. That's a perspective. I'm not devaluing it. It's a perspective based on some, the school rule about teaching full time is less important than motivating students to study well, study hard, and you'll get out early. And hey, in my classes, undergraduate classes, I'm very upfront. Let's get in, get done, and get out. The way the military teaches you to take a shower, right? Don't waste time. You're allowed to spend 5 minutes in the shower, but if you can do it in 3, that's good. All right. So now, I don't take credit to anything on this page. I admit to stealing, okay? There are some educators who will say it's perfectly ethical to use anything in class you can find on the internet. I don't actually subscribe to that. I think that copyright still applies on the internet. But I have been known to steal, and usually I try to say where I got it from. Then it's not stealing, it's citation, right? But sometimes I slip up, or I'm, kind of skimming and scanning to get to help me think it through, and I'm copy pasting stuff, and then later on I go, well, that's really good. I'm going to use it. Where did I get that? I don't remember. But I actually did, in the course of today, find several things that I had put up in this week and next week's class that I didn't have a citation for. I just basically stuck some words into Google and found it. I kind of like this. It turns out this is from a book review of the Ongara book in what's generally considered to be one of the top 5 public administration journals. And I believe we have a subscription here on campus. But I do know that when I Googled for this and found on, the first thing I found was on hosted someplace. It was only a snip. I mean, it wasn't purposeful. It's just like it wasn't all there. But it gave me the citation. So then I went and logged in. Did I log in? I looked for this journal and found it, and that PDF works at least on campus. So I suppose it's either open access or our university has a subscription and it went through the library. Let's find out. This is a different machine. I'm going to guess it's open access. So you could get it if you wanted. So there's a summary of his book. Anyway, the paragraph that I like is, philosophy has been of interest to scholars in public administration for as long as the field has existed, whether in its pre-disciplinary forms or later. Okay, when he says pre-disciplinary, there are people who would argue that public administration was founded at the time of Wilson. That Wilson was a political scientist before he became president of the United States. And his was the founding paper that described this new science that became known public administration. Now, there are Europeans who dispute that, but again, Americans don't care. We only read Americans. But whenever we say public administration started, there would be things before public administration. PPA, pre-public administration. PPA, pre-public administration. Sorry, bad joke. All right. Example, Plato's thoughts on the ideas of government. Or more recent discussions that were shown in debates about the relevance of philosophical pragmatism found in Disputatus Sine Fine. And I didn't Google that. I was going to, but I ran out of time. So I'm not sure where that is. Of the journal Administration and Society. You got to understand that there's a couple of journals like Administrative Science Quarterly, and I think Administration Society, that are well over 100 years old. Administration Science Quarterly originally was focused on business administration and management, and public administration is seen by some people as a splinter from business administration, that they were originally one field. And of course, there are other people that say public administration is a splinter from political science, the Wilsonian school of thought. So whichever way, things that we'll say go back to the 1800s or earlier. Anyway, the questions that philosophy could raise are relevant in several points. Questions about what is the object of study? What is public administration? What should we be looking at? And the nature of the things that we are investigating. Basically subject matter, which if you're studying the big words in academia, you call it ontology, right? The what. And then the questions of education, epistemology. How do we teach it? How do we assess whether people know it? And in modern education in America, there is this belief, for example, that a PhD is a purely theoretical, purely science, narrow field of study. But if you get a doctorate of education, EDD, in the same topic, let's say, for example, government or psychology, that a third of your focus is on the how to teach, how to learn, how to measure learning. So your scientific knowledge, your subject matter knowledge has been watered down because you've only spent 2/3 of your effort on it. Besides the fact that EDD papers are often less. They weigh less, they're lighter, they're thinner, they're smaller. So if you go apply for a job in US university and you've got an EDD versus a PhD, the EDD, the education department will love you. The pure psychology department will say, no thank you. So we have this division. And one argument is always, well, do pure PhDs make good university classroom instructors? Because they've never paid attention to how we learn and how we teach this subject. They've just mastered the subject. So anyway, that's part of the issue in public administration, is that philosophical question of what is it, and how do we know if you know it? How do you assess it? Thus, that question of which is which leads us to questions about morality. Which moral decisions are possible, permissible, can be defended, and which kind of a moral question or moral decision you make, people would say, well, you think that's right, but how do you justify it? How do you explain it? And people can't. If you're watching this video, you want to look at this page because you can't see much on the video. But anyway, blah, 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 blah. Bottom line, various assumptions about PA scholarship have been brought up from time to time, but never studied closely. Okay, so you could call that public administration philosophy. What is your philosophy of public administration? Just for one example, I would point out that in Korea, public administration means definitively government administration. But in the US, public administration absolutely clearly includes things like nonprofits as part of a wider public beyond government. Now, some people will say, well, no, you can get a master's in nonprofit management. Well, yeah, you can now. And it's very often based in the public administration department. But when I was in university in Los Angeles, there were about 8, 9, 10 schools that offered a master's in public administration. There were probably 20 that offered a master's in business administration. There was one that offered a master's in nonprofits, and it was a brand new program. And hospital management, especially for public hospitals, traditionally that fit under the PA program. And it was a mess because the leader of the hospital was always a medical doctor who didn't know nothing about nothing except medicine. And he probably didn't have very good social skills either. The worst possible choice for a leader. And then there would always be a business manager out of the MBA department responsible for making sure, like, we bill correctly. Right? Then the public administration people came in to do most of the rest of the hospital stuff. So now we have masters in hospital administration. But where does the public administration line end? Where does it begin? What's included? I consider that to be a philosophical question. There's my mouse. Mouse, come back. There we go. All right. So this class is not going to explore public administration scholarship unless you want to. That's not really my focus. My orientation has traditionally been much more practical, much more pragmatic, much more, you're working in the field of public administration, what you gonna do? That's kind of unfortunate, Wakas, because you're a PhD student, and my approach is what I learned in my master's program, and it's more appropriate for people who plan to work in the field. And if you are, and I'm not really sure, Eugene, because I never asked you, are you doing a master's en route to a doctorate? I mean, you have a doctorate in mind?
I still don't know.
Still don't know, okay, that's fine. People who plan to do a doctorate tend to think more about the theoretical constructions and less about the real life. People who are doing a master's as a terminal degree are more thinking about, well, when I go back to my desk. All right, so my approach is more of that practical, real life. Instead, we will look at the ethical crisis that can pop up at any time in your work life. And I would include, if you are an academic and you're on university, there's going to be these things that come up. And while some MBA programs are doing more and more on ethics, and law school, all law schools have programs on ethics because it's on the bar exam. But people kind of go like, ha ha, yeah, okay. I need to be able to pass the ethics test for the bar exam. Or for MBA, it's like, yeah, the one rule of ethics in business is don't get caught. Right? And that's it. That's an argument. I don't say it's true. So we're not going to focus on scholarship too much unless you want to. This was just added. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. It's from the Ongano book, so you hopefully picked up on it, but I decided to put it on this page. And it says, let's define philosophy. What is philosophy and why does it matter for PA? This is undoubtedly an arduous question. It's a difficult question. It takes a lot of time. A good starting point lies in pointing out that philosophy, unlike scientific disciplines, does not have a subject matter. Rather, it does have key questions and themes, such as Kenny argues these. And that's interesting because a good friend of mine is a philosophy professor here at this university. And I think he would agree in part that the key aspect of philosophy is the asking of questions and the process for doing so. We don't have processes yet. But on the other hand, when you're teaching undergraduates philosophy, half of the classes that they will take will be reading classic works, being able to write on a test what this guy said or what he meant or what's an example. And that's making it into a discipline. The discipline of philosophy at university, half of the stuff you're doing is dead guys. You took a philosophy class. Am I wrong?
Right.
I'm right. Yeah. Half of the class is studying dead guys. That's okay. I mean, but in math, do we study dead guys? Rarely. We might talk about a dead guy for a minute to say it's his theory and this is why it's right and this is why it's wrong. But we spend 87% of the time analyzing the theory, practicing the theory, and then we test the students if they know the theory. You don't ask them, when did the guy live? When did he die? And what was his girlfriend's name? And we don't ask. But anyway, what is there? Who are we? I don't think this one comes up in public administration very much, but maybe it should. I'm going to raise it in the next hour. How to live together. And here, Kenny wrote political philosophy, but I might say it's as much sociology as it is political philosophy. And how to know what we know. Okay, that goes back to the epistemology that we talked about before. So that's one of the things you would take out of the Ongano book, I hope. the introduction. This next aspect, to be honest, I never really thought about my approach. In terms of teaching, in terms of living, I have an approach. In terms of teaching, two main approaches to teaching ethics. These can affect human behavior in different ways. Opposite behaviors for the same action could be interpreted. The two approaches are the objectivist and the interpretivist. Now, I'm familiar with this because it's the same thing we talk about when we talk about interpreting law. For example, in the US, we are, not we, I'm not one, but the Senate is determining whether they are going to approve a nomination for Supreme Court justice. So they ask this person, how do you feel about X, Y, and Z? They don't say it that way though. They say, how would you interpret this? What is your judicial philosophy? And that's usually broken down into 4 or possibly more different approaches, such as plain text. The words mean what the words mean at the time they were written. We don't interpret them. It's cast in stone. It's the 10 Commandments. And, there is no question about men or women. It's just whatever the 10 Commandments says, that's what it is. And then we have the interpreters who say we should interpret it according to how people understood it at the time. Or we should interpret it according to current social understandings. So is a man only? Or is a woman part of a man? Humanity, mankind. All right? So we have, that's at least 3 right there, and there's more. The interpretive approach is often called, the objectivist approach is also known as deontological. I don't use these big academic words. Anyway, these people say there is one answer. It is unvarying. It is, some people call it an absolutist. We don't interpret it. It doesn't vary. It doesn't matter where you are or who you are or what you are. Cannibalism is wrong. Humans do not eat humans. Any human that eats humans is immoral. Period. Okay, now we didn't ask whether the people are alive or dead. We just said humans who eat humans. So there's a plane crash in the Andes, and 77 people on the plane. This is a true story. 77 people on the plane, and about 30 of them were dead. And it was snow, and there was no food, and they were up there, and so some of the survivors ate some of the dead people. Are they immoral? The objectivists would say, there's no negotiation. You ate human flesh, you're bad. And there are others who would say, well, if they didn't eat human flesh, they would be the next to be dead. So the conditions excuse the behavior. Okay, we've eaten all the dead people. And we have people who are gonna be dead soon, but they're not dead yet, but we're hungry. You're not using that arm anyway, we're just gonna cut it off. We'll eat it. My arm! Hey, you're gonna die tomorrow anyway. We're just gonna take your arm. We're not killing you. We're gonna be very surgical and careful. We're just gonna take your arm because we're hungry. We'll give you some too. Possible? Impossible? This is where the objectivist approach has no middle ground. Okay? They look for objective, measurable criteria and say right or wrong. That's it. Interpretivists are all the other folks. And we're interpreting according to whichever possible analytical framework works for you. I mean, there isn't one interpretivist approach. That's why they call it teleological, because it extends, it goes to wherever it needs to go. All right? The individual's judgment in particular, unique cases, constitute the only criterion for what's right and wrong. I would have to say that I am much more interpretivist
Can you say one approach is better than the other?
That would be a moral judgment in itself. I I think we would have to say that for some people, they're able to choose one and be steadfast. And there are other people who say, like, there's certain things I will not negotiate on, but everything else, I'll look at the circumstances. Thou shalt not kill until the robber is holding an axe and threatening to kill your wife. Would you kill then? All right. Suddenly, that black and white becomes a little bit more challenging. Oh, look, you didn't listen to me. I said, I will not kill except when somebody's in danger. Ah, okay. People are invading your country. People that you don't know are dying. Is it okay to kill? They're invading your country. They might invade your house. They might possibly kill you. But there are certainly people who would absolutely not kill. Quakers. I don't know if they're called globally. Various religious groups that just they would rather die than defend themselves. Anyway, is there a right or a wrong, a better or worse? I wouldn't dare to say, because that would be my moral interpretation. Philosophy of the public interest. Okay, why are we in public administration? Why is public administration different from business administration? Well, business administration focuses on the interest of the owner, ownership, whether that is a single person or stockholders, right? Arguably, when we make a corporation, the corporation has a life, and we should be giving primary concern to the continuation of the life of that business, that the business is more important than the shareholders. Legally, theoretically, that's true, but practicality says no, the shareholders are always first, except when senior management decides that they're first. Right? But in public administration, the argument is that the public good is the primary issue, and the continuation of government is seen as a public good. But if, let's say I hate communism, but the communists are elected in my country, the public good would say that the government, all the government employees and all, should adapt to the new political leadership, because the public good is a stable government, and a civil war in no way addresses the public good. Even if the king is bad, a bad king is probably better than civil unrest, according to the idea of government, public administration. Political science can look at it different, but public administration should say the public good is stability, within reason. So, the public good is the public interest. And philosophy is of public interest. This part we didn't talk about. I mean, it wasn't on the page. Institutionalism. Excuse me, not institutionalism, intuitionism. I keep wanting to put institutionalism in because I think it should be here, but it's not. Intuitionism is gut feeling. It feels right. I just know that it's right. Maybe it's because of my morals and values and ethics, but I don't have a clear, easy, scientific way to justify my decision. Seems right. Perfectionism. Idealism, the ideal case kind of idea. Remembering that ideal case doesn't actually mean perfect. It just means the best that we could expect, perhaps theoretically. An ideal case. That's something we can put in a case book and say, that's an example of it. Perfectionism. The public interest should be the standpoint of promotion of excellence, that we should do as best as we can. Okay? Best benefit for society. The best members of the society benefit the most from the expenditure. Therefore, according to this theory, Perfectionism is elitism. This is one of the mainstream approaches to education in Korea. Korean education is divided into two concepts. One is perfectly displayed in the Moon Jae-in government. We have to bring the weak up. We need to bring everybody to a similar level. We need to make everybody equal as much as we can. The flip side of that would be taking from the rich, and they didn't advocate taking from the rich. They just advocated bringing everybody up to the rich level, which obviously you're not going to do in one generation, but that's details. So one is raising the poor, poor in money, poor in education, poor in whichever way you want to assess it, to bring the less advantaged up to the level of the fully advantaged, maybe even the more advantaged. The other approach in education in Korea has been, we need to maximize our national benefit by giving the best of the best opportunity. We want the best of the best to be the best they can be. So if you are naturally smart, we want to send you to a school that's going to challenge you, that's going to enable you to win a Nobel Prize for the country, right? Because we are going to give you all the resources and assets to help you be your best. We're not talking about the poor people. No, we're not saying the poor people shouldn't be advantaged. We're simply not talking about them. We're saying we want to make our best their best, because that's the best for society. We're going to build a bridge. Where are we going to build a bridge? Do we build a bridge that will maximize the benefit for the trucking, of industrial goods? Well, that's probably the best thing for the country. Might not be the best thing for the ultimate rich, but it's not always the rich that we're looking for. We just choose what is the thing that will make our nation, the public interest, its best, and put our resources into improving that so that we elevate our country. Wakas. What would be considered direction of national resources to improving the country in Pakistan? Is it more populist? Is it more egalitarian? Or is it improving certain sectors of society to raise the nation?
It depends the government. Few governments, like the previous government, they prefer to spend most of the public money on the business sector. Because they believe that, like, if they will put the money in the business sector, if they will elevate the business sector, it will produce the thousands of job opportunities. It's gonna boost the economy, so on and so forth.
Right, and in the Ronald Reagan era in the United States, they called that trickle-down economics. If you feed the elephant will evacuate its bowels, and there's still grain in that manure on the ground, and then the birds will come down and pick up the grain out of the manure, and everybody benefits. That's the simplified version of trickle-down, yes. But other governments...
The current government is doing exactly the opposite. They didn't put a penny into the business sector. Instead of putting money in business sector and improving the economy, they just making the populist decisions, like they are making the shelters for the homeless people on the streets.
Sounds like you don't like that one very much, because you said things like they just...
The thing is, the people 2 years before who were living in their houses, you just ditched the country's economy. So those people who are living in their houses, now they are forced to live in your shelters, and you are making more shelters instead of building the economy. So the people don't need to be in shelters.
So you are an economic conservative. I'm not blaming you, but I mean, that is a true example of the government is actually damaging the middle class by supporting the
free food boxes. Like the prime minister of the country is inaugurating a food van which will distribute the free lunch boxes to the homeless people.
Is that a bad thing?
It's not the bad thing, but the thing is, you made those people to like be in your
Did they make
shelters.
it? If the government stops, just discussion for the purpose of discussion. If the government stops supporting big business, which obviously is going to make the wealthy more wealthy, but we'll leave that to the side for the moment. But they're supporting business, and supporting business enables the working class and the middle class to have jobs. If the government stops directing public money to that sector, is that bad?
Yes, it is.
Shouldn't the private sector be able to function by itself? That free hand concept of economics is that, government should not meddle, should not interfere.
The private sector can survive its own, but still the every sector needs some kind of government support in terms of governance, management. I'll give you the simple example. If you're not supporting the private sector, if you will increase the price of electricity from maybe 10 or 20%.
Who owns the electricity generation? Is it the government?
The government.
Okay, so that's a factor. What if we privatize electricity?
Electricity is
The government just sells all of the electrical production. We did it in Korea. KEPCO is fully privatized now.
privatized, but there is a government institution who decides the
Rate
price
setting.
of the electricity.
Okay, yep.
So what they did, they increased the prices of gas and electricity. So
Uh-huh.
what happened, the big industries, they moved from our country to the Bangladesh.
Right, okay. Yep,
So,
because they got a better deal in Bangladesh.
So yeah.
Yep, that's what happens with the global
And-
economy, yep.
The single government is not able to provide jobs to the full population of the countries.
Right,
It's the
right.
private sector who always provide the job. So the government job is to support the private sector so they are be able to provide the job.
Okay, so we know your politics, your political economics approach. Eugene, do you agree?
Well, I think I am also a political economist in that sense because, if I'm not mistaken, the previous administration in our country.
Our country means Philippines. Okay, just confirming. You're in Korea now. It's not my country, it's not his country, but you said our country. Right, okay.
In the Philippines was more on the economic side, but the administration now doesn't really care about it. I think the president himself is just more eager to get power himself, so he took more budget for the military. He did not give any budget to the economy.
Okay, so we'll agree for the moment that giving money to the military does not create many jobs. Sure, in some countries, the military might be 22, 23% of all males. But in general, we don't usually think of the military as being the economy. Now, buying weapons for the military could be a major part of the economy. So, every time the US president buys a bunch of toys for the military or gives a bunch of toys away, like to Ukraine, that military industry complex is going like, yes, and the stock prices rise. Okay, so there is that side.
But I don't think giving budget to the military means in the Philippines means buying more weapons. In this case, they give more budget to the military to give the military personal incentives whenever they caught drug dealers.
Okay, so financial rewards to the military. Financial rewards. Okay. But now the soldiers have more pocket money so they can buy a new color TV and PC and air conditioner in their house. That's promoting the economy, isn't it? But you said you can't hire everybody, and I agree you can't hire everybody. But some countries, classic communism, 80% of the workforce worked for the government, got their paycheck from the government, and spent their money at the company store, so it came out the same anyway. Yeah, so maybe I definitely don't see, I don't feel about things the same way as you two, but I do understand the issue. By the way, I teach economics sometimes. But yeah, so we have this question of what is the perfect solution? And the perfect solution generally means maximizing benefit. Which benefit is maximized? Well, theoretically, under this perfectionist, we could say, no child will be hungry. That could be a theoretical ideal, and it could go under perfectionism, but usually we'll put the no child hungry into the next class, which is utilitarianism. Okay? So perfectionism is more often pointed to maximizing certain sectors because they will maximize the benefit to society in the future, if not right now. Like, we have these elite high schools in Korea, and certain people in Korea want to eliminate all the elite high schools, and other people are like, no, because this is where our future brain power will be educated. So, you know, egalitarianism versus directing your resources to where they're going to pay off the best, you think. Utilitarianism basically says everybody is better off, or at least as many people as possible are better off. And in this case, we're typically looking at short term, now or in the very near future, okay, as opposed to maybe longer off. Utilitarianism is kind of crass because it can make some worse off. For example, if we say, you're 65, you're never going to contribute to society, you're never going to, we don't have enough, we're just going to cut you off. So we're not going to do anything for the 65s. You're senior, I hope you saved enough money when you were working, I hope you have enough kids to support you, because we just can't, because we're going to put all our resources into the elementary school through 40-year-old, because these are the people we can improve in order to improve the nation. And if you're 40 to 60, well, we're not going to cut you off, but you're not our focus. You're important if you're 42 and you've got a kid who's 15, right? We're concerned about the younger people. So utilitarian, the widest possible benefit, even if we have to sacrifice a few. Net balance of social satisfaction. And we're looking at it on a very crass, impersonal level. So the political and social issues are not really important because, the true public administrator spits on political science. Don't care. So they say. Theory of justice. This is a mess because it's not really a theory. Or maybe you have to say it's a theory with two poles, like, black and white, and there's a continuum in the middle. The first principle is that each person is to have an equal right. The second one, policies are supposed to be to everyone's advantage, but they can't be. So if there's a conflict, the second principle is expected to prevail. So that means sometimes we have to choose. Everyone has the same rights except when they don't. Pretty much. Right to what? Right to a minimum income, perhaps some people would say. Right to minimum level of health care, some people would say. The UK and Canada have guaranteed national health. So does Norway and a bunch of other countries, but I don't know them as well. So what it means in Canada is, well, if you're old and you need a hip replacement or a knee replacement, you might have to wait 5, 6, 7 years to get it because there's other people whose needs are more pressing and our budget is only this much. So we have to allocate it out. And since a knee or a hip is not life-threatening, it's a quality of life issue, you go down the pool. What happens? I've got money. I could go to US and get it done. I could go to Bangkok and get it done. Singapore and get it done. Of course, Bangkok is cheaper than Singapore, but in general, Singapore is a little bit better quality of life while you're waiting and while you're doing things. So the people who have money can buy what they want outside the system. Is that justice? Well, it's justice for the many. And there's few who have money to go outside and they go outside. And there are few who have a miserable life for 4 years and they're almost to the line where they're going to get their knee and they passed away. Maybe not because of the knee, right? So if it's fair to everybody, is it fair to anybody? Perhaps. So the human factor. I believe, as it says, the human factor should be first. I usually talk about the 3 E's, E, in public administration. Economy, effectiveness, and efficiency. A lot of people only talk about 2 E's. I talk about 3. The reason is because we can measure them differently, and a reason is because it was the basis for my master's thesis. Okay, anyway, economy in this case doesn't mean the global economy. It means economy in terms of cheap. Get as much as you can. Right? Save money. Efficiency and effectiveness. Effectiveness, get the most bang for the buck. Get as much as you can from a dollar. It takes a lot more time to discuss them differently, but kind of sort of, one is focusing on outcomes, one is focusing on money, and one is kind of a balance, efficiency, not waste. And so we can, and not everybody does the difference differently, and that's why a lot of people only do 2 E's, but I do 3, and it's basically focus on outcome, focus on cost, or focus on some kind of a middle ground where we're saying trade-offs. However, those 3 E's don't factor in human at all. Now, when we talk about human, what are we talking about? We talk about human in society, the client, let's say, the citizen. We're talking about humans inside the organization. Does a public servant have the same rights as a citizen? If we decide to maximize business, that could mean that we downsize the public sector. It could mean that some public servants are not hired. I studied hard, but we're not going to hire 5,000 public servants this year like we did last year. This year we're going to hire 1,000 because we're downsizing. What about those 4 people who spent 3 years studying for the test? And they were number 1,382 in the test score, and they don't get hired. What about the public servant who's told, we are retrenching, and so instead of working until 62, we've changed the retirement age to 60. Some governments are doing that. They're forcing public servants out early. But I got a kid in college. Well, so you're going to have to work more. In the Philippines, are government offices open on Saturday?
No.
In Pakistan?
There's some offices open.
Some offices are open on Saturday. If you're hired as a public servant, could you be transferred from one department to another such that in my first department we never work Saturdays, but in the second department we have to work Saturdays? It could happen. Okay. When I first came to Korea, I don't remember which one was which, but either every government office was open every Saturday for a half day, or every government office, almost every government office, was open alternate Saturdays for something close to a full day. But anyway, public servants worked 44 hours a week. That was the norm, official norm. But only a few offices didn't open on Saturday. So then it changed to 40-hour work week, and they didn't work on Saturdays. But what if at some point in time we said, no, for the public good, we need to open Saturdays. And by the way, you get to work Saturdays. But I am, name of the church, I can't think of the church. I am of the church that has religious services on Saturday. Sorry. Okay. I mean, we know Jewish or Muslim or Friday, Jewish or
Saturday.
is it Saturday? Friday? I can't remember now. I should know this. Anyway, in the U.S., there are many businesses that will hire part-timers. You know, Sunday is the part-timers who are Jewish because it's not their Sabbath. Some Christians don't want to work on Sunday, so it's like, okay. Anyway, the human factor. Relationships between administration and employees, right? Top down. And administration between employee and employee, which they don't talk about. Employee and employee. And administration, and here we're going to go bigger and say the whole organization, government, and the public. Functioning through standardized systems means bureaucracy, right? Anyway, more on that. We're not going to do that. What I want to do now is to stop with all that and ask you, what did you find interesting, useful, difficult, not interesting, absolute rubbish, because I think there's some of that, in his discussion? I think we have to agree that the first sentence is true. There's a gap between literature in public governance, public administration, and public management. Now, he doesn't mean between these three so much as collectively. And later in his article, he says, we're going to call all of these public administration. Governance, public management, and public administration, we're going to collectively call this public administration, which makes sense because governance and public management are both kind of intellectual spin-offs from what was originally called public administration. Are you familiar with these words, governance and public management?
Like right here.
Okay, so in the simplest form, public management sounds like using business management techniques in the public sector instead of the classic bureaucracy and political science. What are the political outcomes? Kind of an approach, focusing more on the business side. And governance is more about including people outside of the official decision-making chain. So asking citizens, how do you feel? Asking other stakeholders who maybe are not citizens, maybe they're businesses, asking other people to participate in the decision-making process. Simplified version of governance, you're all right with that? Including outsiders into the decision-making process. That's okay? Yeah, all right. I mean, books are written. People disagree. Sailing, not rowing. Gabler and Osborne and Gabler, yeah. Anyway, that's a fast enough survey there. So when we take public administration as a broad class, we have this gap in the literature. The gap is about the lack of exploration and consideration of the links between topics that are debated in these fields and key philosophical issues. Now I'm going to say philosophy is, Philosophy is, why is that? Why do I think so? What? First, asking the question, and second, coming up with your answer. And of course, we can read more about philosophy in terms of, there are processes to follow, but in a broad brush, philosophy means why? Why is it a problem? Why do I think so? What is that all about? And then, I think so because, simplified version. Why are you choosing to study public administration?
Because 4 years ago, when I came here in Korea, I've met foreign workers here, and I saw their struggle in their work, and I think entering the public administration field could help them, maybe.
Okay.
In terms of maybe demystifying that kind of conflict.
Say again?
Demystifying the conflict in the workplace.
Okay, I would say demystifying, and that's why I didn't catch it the first time, but you're fine. Yeah, demystifying.
Yeah.
But who would you work for?
Public.
Public has no money. Public who? The government? A nonprofit? A church? See, I consider churches to be part of public. Some people don't.
Is labor office part of?
The labor office in Korea, yeah, they're government employees. Yeah. Okay. Korea does not have a very good track record of hiring foreigners in government positions, except as contracted employees for a very, very, very special project or as translators.
But I've met foreigners in the labor office. That's why I'm very interested in
Foreigners as clients or foreigners as employees of the labor office?
employees.
Stay with what I said. Contract employees to do very, very special projects or contract employees as translators. That's basically, like in many countries, basically you have to be a citizen in order to be hired by government as a regular employee. That's a fundamental law in Korea. If you're not a citizen, you're not eligible to be hired as a regular employee. So that's why it's kind of an interesting response. That's why I was kind of like, what do you mean by that? Blockhouse? Why are you studying public? I mean, you teach it. Why?
Due to my interest in politics and
Your trust in politics?
interest.
Oh, I'm sorry. Again, pardon my bias in American English. Sometimes I hear something, I'm like, what? Okay, so I would say interest.
Interest, yeah.
Yeah.
So
I heard in trust. I'm like, trust? Trust who? Trust what? Okay, my interest in,
the politics and the governmental working,
okay,
how the bureaucracy works, the government institution works.
uh-huh.
So due to these interests, I started studying public administration. I did my master's and 18 years of education.
And what do you want to do your doctoral thesis about? Not too specific. Because our missing student hasn't heard this, so.
Now I am more keen to work on the environmental policy side
Mm-hmm.
in my doctorate.
Mm-hmm. And the key word for me there is policy. So as we mentioned about public administration, we talked about governance and public management and public administration. Well, public administration, as I mentioned, is very politically oriented. Well, policy is about politics. It's on that poli side, the political decision-making side. So yeah, so you're coming from the policy side, like most of the professors at this department. I don't know any of their research background on their PhD well enough to be specific. I mean, some I know, but the others I don't know enough to be able to say whether anybody did management, public management, the administration side. Most of them were policy people. So I'm an administration guy. I enjoy policy. It's fun. It's interesting. But somebody's got to do the work. Somebody's got to get things done. Somebody's got to make sure that the contractor is repairing the city streets correctly. And policy guys don't do that. Policy guys sit at a desk and go, okay, now you know my bias. All right. And maybe that's a philosophy in and of itself. Then he talks about previous works that could be referred to. The theme of philosophical foundations of public administration. Related to philosophical foundations of any broader public issue. Do they talk about the philosophy of government or public administration in Pakistan?
Philosophy of government?
Government sounds like, well, the government changed, right? New election. So I don't mean at the ministerial level. I mean the those bureaucrats, those 30-year people. Is there an official philosophy for the organization of the national government of Pakistan?
I never heard of
Huh?
such concepts in the government sector or some bureaucracy.
I don't think there is in the U.S. either. So let's turn it on its head. What is the typical citizen's perception of government? And again, we're leaving the politicians at that top level out. What is the general public's perception of government?
The perception is not good. It's the perception we have about the particular perception we have about the bureaucracy. They like red tape. They're
Red tape,
corrupt,
yep. They're corrupt,
they're lazy.
lazy,
They like to make things difficult.
make things difficult.
Yeah.
So if somebody
People perception is
says that I'm a public servant, is the perception of that person good or bad? I work in the Ministry of Labor. I'm a 20-year man. I'm not a top official. I'm a 20-year man. Is the perception of that person good or bad?
It again depends on
I don't know you.
for which department you work.
Oh, okay.
For which department you work. Like some departments are considered like
Especially bad.
and some departments considered okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Like if a person say, I work for the Ministry of Human Rights,
Uh-huh.
so I don't have any perception about that person because I don't know what the.
Okay, so you're associating the person with the
Like
ministry.
If I say that if I work for some department of police, so then the perception.
Okay, but now you're tainting that person by what you think his job is.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm sure that happens. But
That's
somebody just
very
says, I work for the government, or my uncle works for the government. My friend is going to think what? You used 4 phrases. You said corrupt, bureaucrat, lazy. What was the 4th one? I forgot. It was something. Make things difficult. Make things difficult. Would I think that of your uncle? I've not met him. I would just imagine he's a typical bureaucrat. Same true in the Philippines?
Yeah.
Would you add anything?
Most of the people view government in our country as problematic, lazy, and dirty. Maybe.
Dirty meaning corrupt.
Yeah.
That's a question. Dirty means corrupt. Okay. See, in U.S., very, very, very few people would say that a typical public servant, typical government employee is corrupt. I think corruption is basically out of the picture. Maybe some cops, right? Or some other kind of enforcement official. A few, especially in small towns. Maybe. But they like to make things difficult. Well, I don't know if they would point to the person that way. They would just say, bureaucracy's that way, right? It's bureaucratic. There's always more hoops to jump through. But they wouldn't necessarily say, but it's that worker's fault. It's the system they work in. It's like working at McDonald's, right? I mean, there's just things you got to do. But, okay, let's go back to the shopping list again. What was it? Corrupt? Red tape of bureaucracy. Okay, we would include bureaucracy, red tape, make things difficult. What was the 4th? What was the other one? Lazy. Most people would say most public servants are lazy. They just work their hours, they clock in, they clock out, and they're overpaid. Now you ask the public servants, they say, well, on average, we get paid less than somebody in the private sector doing the same job. And let's say that's true. $50,000 a year. We're just going to pull a number out of the air. $50,000 a year is what The private sector pays, and the public sector probably pays $44,000 a year. Okay, so 10–12% less on average. But productivity, let's say you're a computer programmer and you got the same kind of work on either side. People would expect the private sector in productivity to be much higher because they've got a boss standing over their shoulder saying, "Aren't you done yet?" And in the government sector, it's like, it'll get done, oh gee, it's 5 o'clock. It'll get done next week. Right? So there's that idea of efficiency. Public servants are lazy. Yeah, I think that's pretty strong. And the second half of it is that public servants, while they might get paid less hour by hour, their retirement benefits are better and their job stability is very, you're going to work until you're 60. You don't really have to worry about downsizing. It just doesn't happen very much. And so Korea, the last 10 years, lots of young people wanted to become government employees. They wanted that, what's called the iron rice bowl, right? Unbreakable, guaranteed job until you're 60. Yeah, it might be lazy. Yeah, it might pay a little bit less. It definitely does. Starting wage for a level 9 public servant in Korea is abysmal. It is low. In fact, they're talking about if they do 2 more minimum wage increases in Korea, minimum wage will be higher than the public servant's basic pay. It's that low. It's like 1.3 million won is the base pay for a level 9 now, which and minimum wage in Korea is like 1.2, something like that, really close. But there's a lot of ancillary benefits. You know, there's uniform clothing and there's various other support. So it's not quite that bad, but it's really low. Level 9 public employees who have to go away to a different city, like my students who gets a job in Seoul, they have to live with an in-law. They have to live with a cousin or sister or something because they can't afford to live there. So they're certainly not rich and they're not corrupt, but they're lazy. Very widespread. And the bureaucracy is hopeless. Maybe they're not very good. They couldn't get a job in a real company. It's very common theme. They couldn't get a job in a real company. They studied to pass a test, but they don't have any real skills, just a paper test. So yeah. So we're talking about what are some of the ways that people might perceive government, perceive workers in government, because if you don't think the workers are very good, you're not going to have a very good opinion of government. He gives an example of TQM, total quality management, and how it might be judged in a private sector job and in a public sector job, or even 2 different private sector jobs. Might have to be very different because our TQM is based on your criteria for measurement. And if your criteria are different, how can you cross it? So he uses that as an example to say, how can we compare public sector and private sector when the criteria are different? Anyway, basically, this is enough, right? The title of the introduction is Introduction and Rationale. Why am I writing a book about philosophy of public administration? There's nothing else I want to cover today, but I did want to give you the opportunity to ask questions. There's that definition that I used. Do you have any questions on what you read? I'm not going to test you on any specifics of this work. Next week, we're actually going to look at the public service ethics laws in Korea. It's maybe not the most current version, because it's a screen capture of a website. But it raises the question that I want you to think for next week is, because next week we're talking about organizational ethics. Who are these ethics written for? And by that you could say, who's the beneficiary? Who is the, who do they limit? The people who wrote it, passed it, what was their motivation? Is it right? You know, I want to be able to tell the citizens I did something, right? The political interest. Who are these ethics for? And then think about maybe who they should be for. And if they were for somebody different, how would they be changed? So we started in week 3. I pointed out some teacher ethics. And I said, well, these are specific to teachers, but the themes are valid. So when we look at the national public service ethics, you might say, well, who are these written for? I mentioned last week about a wedding, right? Did I? I think I did. Last week I did not go to a wedding. And I sent 50,001. And I sent 50,001 because the law says that's what I can send. And if I sent less, I would be seen as cheap, right? So, and 50,000 is not much for somebody in my position. I'm paid. It's not like I'm working at McDonald's and 50,000 is a day's pay. Yeah, that's next class. Any questions about today's readings?
I'm just confused by what is the meaning of human factor is the central concern of public administration. Why is it the central concern? Yes.
The central concern for business administration is making money. Now, in order to make money in business, we have to have good employees. We have to make sure that they're properly motivated and not demotivated, that they have good working conditions so that they can maximize their performance. We may want to look at the science of how they do things. I mentioned last class about the right size shovel. Okay, so all of those things are based on the central concern of making money. That's business. So what is the central concern of public administration? Well, if you said the central concern is executing government policy, then you'd say, yeah, but why is there public policy, right? Somewhere you haven't quite got to the nut of it yet. Why do we have a government? Why is there any kind of government? It's to improve the human condition. Because we believe that without a government we would have no policing, that we'd have no communal organization, for example. It rains sometimes, it doesn't rain sometimes. Hey, let's get together and build a dam so we can save water in the rainy time, so when it's not raining, we have water. That's a kind of a communal decision that improves the public condition. That's the great forefather of public administration. So we decide that we're going to do things to improve the public condition, and we say, how are we going to do that? Now we've hit administration. Okay, so public administration is not about paperwork, it's about the process of doing to improve the human condition. I like to give a Korean example which is absolutely inaccurate. It's inaccurate because the two terms are actually from the Chinese, they're hanja. And they don't mean, the word has 2 or 3 different meanings, but if you look at the original hanja, they don't mean what I'm saying. But if we look at hang jung, without paying attention to the hanja, hang means do, and jung is a short form for 정부, which means government. So ignoring the hanja, we could say hang jung means doing government. But what is government? That jung, okay, it's not chocopai jung. Right? Oh, I'm so happy. But that jung is actually the same jung that's used in things like politics. 정치, 외교. Okay? Jung. It's something about policy, politics. It's the poli. It's the Greek poli, P-O-L-I. P-O-L-I. That means for the public good, political science, poly. So that jung not the true hanja, but the jong that's really referring to is a public sentiment. So doing for the public or doing for public good. So who is the public? The public are humans. So the human condition is the focus of public administration. But again, and I think to be fair to the policy guys, because I always like to pick on the public policy guys. To be fair to policy guys, policy is always oriented towards the human condition. But public management or administration on that managerial side is often oriented to the efficiency and effectiveness question in terms of, I've got this much money and I need to do this many widgets, this many things. And so it becomes this kind of business management approach. And so to be fair to the public policy guys, they're almost always concerned with the human condition. And public administration is often not so much. Good question. I hope I gave you a almost good answer. I hope. By the way, your jacket's nice. Are you dressing up today for something?
No.
No? I can't see with the lighting, and I shouldn't look too closely to know whether you're wearing a t-shirt or a glamorous sweater or whatever. I don't know. It's black. But the jacket looks nice. The jacket, you're dressed better than I am. Wakas is wearing the shirt I should be wearing. I'm wearing this one. This is from a conference in Indonesia where they, very often when you go to a conference, they want to give the invited speaker some kind of gift, and it happens to be a shirt. And the other shirt you've seen me wear, which is red, which is kind of similar, is from the Philippines. But the same kind of thing. Went to a conference and they gave me a shirt. And don't ask me what the symbol is, because I'm not sure about the Philippines, but in Indonesia, every island, sometimes every major town or kind of district, they have their own pattern, which is representative of that pattern. Just like in Scotland, the kilt is representative of a family line. Well, in Indonesia, the design is representative of a district. I also have the skirts from Indonesia, and two or three from Indonesia, one from Malaysia, and one from the Philippines. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about?
No.
If you look at people in Indonesia or certain areas, traditional Filipino. I don't even know the Filipino word. I'm trying to struggle to come up with the Indonesian word. But you know it, like if you, hey, when I was, you won't get this, she'll get this. When I was in college, I actually danced the tinikling.
Oh.
Which is the moving sticks that you dance and you step in and step out, and if you don't step out fast enough, whack, these two big bamboo sticks smack you on the ankle.
Is this the one you're talking about?
Only half height. I mean, it's long, but you pull it up to here, and then you fold it, and depending on where you're from, usually you fold it in front, and then you roll it down so that it covers basically from the belly button or slightly lower down to the knees or ankle. Yeah, if you look at a picture of somebody dancing the tinikling or whatever, you'll see it. What do we call it? Golly, gosh. I hate when that happens. Anyway, why did I mention that? Somehow I got to the idea of dress. Oh, because of the shirt. That these kinds of, I'll think of it after class, that the patterns are based on districts. But I don't know about this. I know it came from a store because I saw the packaging on it. But the one from the Philippines, I don't think Philippines does that. If you were now I'm really upset because I've lost the name of the Philippine shirt. You call it a Philippine
Barong.
Yeah, it still sounds wrong. Barong. Okay, barong Filipino. Yeah. It's like there, but this is really heavy because Indonesia and parts of Philippines have mountains where it can get cold. So The skirt, well, I think of the name. From the Philippines, it's from Isabela. So it's really heavy because it's cold up there. They grow corn, they don't grow rice. But anyway, yeah, we're killing time. Questions? Philosophy. Really, this is more setting the table for. In previous years, we usually had some kind of a reason to not have class, like a trip or something. And so I would give a short reading, or I would go to a conference or something. I have a short reading, and people would write a report. Basically make your own case by giving you a case. But so we're a little off cycle. But next class is talking about the official ethics policies.
Last question. I'm
Yep.
really interested about migrant workers, foreign workers. Is there any job relevant to public administration? Because at first I'm really planning to apply in our country, Department of
In the
Labor.
Philippines. You're not in the Philippines right now. Don't say our. You're the only Filipino here.
In the Philippines, yeah.
Yeah.
So is that relevant?
The Philippines has their OFW department that has people in a number of countries, but I don't think they have anybody in Korea.
Should be the embassy, no?
The embassy would know, and there might be an OFW officer in the embassy to take care of complaints, but I mean, not somebody who job is like to negotiate the workers' roles in the
Oh,
country.
there is. In the Philippines, I don't know here in Korea.
In the Philippines, there is. I'm saying I don't know if they have that kind of person in Korea, and the Korean government definitely does not have that kind of position. If I have a complaint with my employer, I go down to what's typically by Americans called the labor board.
Are you familiar with the employment permit system?
Yes, I do know that. And there's nobody in except one staff at the Philippines embassy in Seoul who never leaves. The EPS system is run by the government of Korea. They don't have any foreign employees. They have no need. Because their focus is the employer. Then the EPS permit is handled by the Korean embassy in the Philippines.
There is POEA, Philippine Overseas Employee.
Yeah, something like that. But in Korea, there are no. I don't want to say absolutely no because I don't know absolutely no. But my understanding is there are no. The only Filipinos I know working in Korean kind of government agencies are some of the banks, which are basically owned by the government, have foreign staff to cater to foreign customers.
So basically, I can't find jobs here.
At this point in time, I don't believe there are any. Now, that doesn't mean that there couldn't be, and there are some NGOs that do work, and they might have employees, NGOs. But the government, you cannot be a permanent employee in Korea if you're not a Korean citizen. You cannot be a permanent employee of the government. Some of the national universities hire foreign faculty, but they cannot give them the same terms as the Korean faculty because they're non-citizens. If you work at a private university, it's up to the private university. So my old university, I had Korean terms. I had no contract. I was exactly the same as Koreans, and it drove immigration crazy. Because, they're bureaucrats. They tend to say, tick one of these 4 boxes. I'm sorry, I'm not one of those 4 boxes. I'm a Korean. No, you're not. Ask my school. But here, foreign faculty are treated in a different status. That's not bad or good. It's just different. There are advantages. So it's not bad or good. It's just different. So I would say at the present time, there are no jobs in the Korean government for foreigners except contract workers, especially in translation. Yeah, that's what I would say. I think I have to stay with that. Being a contract worker could be a really good gig, but it's year to year. Most Most cities will hire, like a translation staff, they'll hire them for 1, 2, or 3 years, and then they make it for whatever reasons. I couldn't predict, but I don't know of any. But it could change, especially with a new president who wants, apparently he's going to want a lot more foreign workers. He wants to promote business, and Koreans don't want to do those jobs. That means there's going to have to be more foreign workers. It's the only way it works, right? You're going to make more factories in Korea, got to have factory workers. Anyway, yeah, so I don't have a good answer for you. And I don't think anybody else does right now. But who knows what Yoon's going to do? Might be good for you. It seems like he follows your political economics theory. Yeah, and yours, not mine. I'm not necessarily in favor of Moon's approach either. I think there's a bit more of a middle ground, but that's all right. Anyway, I'm going to stop this recording because we're not doing anything useful.